Coming up, we turn the microphone over to the fan base. What are the hot takes, the big, bold questions, predictions for the upcoming season that the Brooklyn Nets finest want us to answer? We dive in on a Cam Thomas, Devin Booker comparison. What happens if Ben Simmons forces the hand of Sean Marks? All that and more coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, when you unleash, with very specific instructions, to go as big and bold as you possibly want to, you're going to get the Brooklyn Nets coming in fan base with some hot takes. Hot takes that I think are going to be interesting to throw out, unbeknownst to you, Doug Norrie.
Yeah, no preamble for this one. You did not read. I kind of saw a few of them on Twitter, so it's not going to be a total surprise. I do not know which ones you picked out. There were some definitely spicy ones around where the Nets are headed this season as we head into a year where the team looks, there's still a lot of question marks here. But, since we did our minutes episode, we were like, someone will get traded. No one's gotten traded. So everyone's coming into the season. We're coming into the season hot. But as we've seen, there's lots of, and we'll get to the questions here in 1 second, but there's definitely lots of opinions about how this Nets season could unfold. And I do feel like there's a section of the fan base that has, I would call it a quasi irrational view of sort of what this team is. And I'm curious to see if that's where some of these takes are. But hey, that was the assignment was get crazy with it. So I totally understand that. And I think that judging by what I saw ahead of time, I think that's probably where we're going to go.
Yeah, there is a understanding that we said as you get as wild as you want with them. But there has been throughout this offseason at least some segment of the Nets fan base that has been willing to suggest, but what if this happens? What if the tank is not totally guaranteed? So we kick it off with Cypher, who's a frequent flyer for us over on X. He's also usually, I think, in our YouTube comments as well. He came in with a premise, which I feel like we had to kick it off with, a Ben Simmons premise. Assuming Ben Simmons can stay healthy and be 80%. Now, I could stop there and we could just have that discussion, but I won't. And be what he was, 80% of what he was in Philly. What does that mean for the Nets? Does Marks pivot from the rebuild, something he was very hesitant to do to begin with, or does he stay on track and still try to go for a top 5 pick? Doug, I give you, of course, the context that Ben Simmons during his time in Philly was a 16-point scorer per game with 8 rebounds, almost 8 assists, and banging down 56% from the field. Let's just start with Ben Simmons, 80% of who he was, and also healthy all year. That's probably very achievable for him this season, I'd say.
Well, I did see on Instagram where he posted a workout video with a disco ball above him, so it's absolutely wheels up here on the Ben Simmons back to full basketball. I mean, if Instagram stories can be believed. No, okay, so this is a common theme that I've seen multiple times of a concern that the Nets are going to, and maybe this is how it's going to play out for a few of these. The concern that the Nets are going to be quote too good. Right. Like all these best case scenarios are going to come back. And the Nets are going to be too good. They're going to be this playing team, or they're going to get out of the tank. There's close to zero risk of this, even if Ben Simmons were to return, which I think is unbelievably unlikely. But let's say even if he were to return to 80% of what he was, to me, that's still not good enough to get this team anywhere close to a play-in. They have so many other deficiencies talent-wise that even if Simmons came back, which would be great, by the way, it'd be great. If he did that, that'd be a fun form of basketball. I think the Nets would be really engaging to watch. I still don't think that's worth more than a few wins, probably over the course of a season. And I think it just forgets that the talent levels on this team are so below market, and so they're below replacement level, basically. They essentially are at replacement level right now. How do we know that? Because they're bringing in replacement level guys of the street that Nets fans think might end up playing. Killian Hayes, Zaire Williams, like these guys that, had trouble breaking through with other teams. So that's my high level take on the Simmons thing is even if he got all the way back to all NBA, it's like still nowhere close enough to be this team be anything worse than bottom 5 in the league. As far as that's what I think.
We'll see. And so I tend to agree with you on that front. And I'll take it the extra step further with what Cypher mentioned, though, the Sean Marks of it. Like, what would Sean Marks' reaction be to Ben Simmons playing at that level? And I think it's to your point. Even if he was, I don't think it makes a massive impact in terms of the wins and losses. But let's just say that he's healthy and he's playing really well. I don't think it was interesting when Cypher said it's something he was hesitant to do in terms of going to a rebuild. Well, yeah, like no franchise wants to go in the rebuild, especially when you come off of the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving era that didn't end up leading to championships, and you're trying to salvage a lot of a roster that was built to be a part of that run. So you pivot into the Mikal Bridges of it all. I think, one, if he was playing that well, Ben Simmons, I'll again go back to the trade deadline well and say, if you're telling me this guy is having that large of an impact, then I'll go ahead and say somebody's got to be interested in taking Ben Simmons for half a season. Like, let's have that conversation. And I think that Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets, they have the picks. They understand what the assignment is here. They would do what's necessary. Ben Simmons, you're playing so well. We'd hate for you to get hurt down the back end of the season. We're going to reduce your minutes. Ben Simmons, you're playing so well. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we take player X maybe off the court. Like, I don't think there is a pivot point short of the impossible. Brooklyn Nets come out the gates going 12-2, and they go, well, it looks like this young team is just too plucky. Let's start, spending draft picks. It's not going to happen. So I just don't think there is anything that gets Sean Marks to say, I need to reevaluate what our new tanking and rebuilding agenda is.
And no, there's no way. Look, we've been through all the. Go back and listen to some of our pre-draft coverage, right here. We've covered who the sort of consensus top 5 guys are right now. And looking at those guys, it's just like the stakes are too high.
Ben Simmons doesn't come anywhere near sniffing the idea of what those players' potentials are to justify pivoting off of something.
Not in 3 years. Not in 3 years or whatever. Like, which is wherever like the timeline you have for everyone else. So 4 years. So it's just like nothing about it would line up. And so besides just the part where it's unbelievably unlikely for this to happen, for him to return, there's just like no real meaningful evidence that's going to happen. Even then, I think it's still probably overrating Simmons a little bit. And it's just, again, underrating the talent void and who's just not going to be on this roster anymore. Remember, Cam Johnson's going to get traded. DFS is probably going to get traded. Bojan going to get traded, even if he was kind of healthy. Schroeder almost for sure going to get traded. They're just and none of those guys would really be on the team in a year from now anyway. And so I just think it's.
Yeah, sorry. I like Cypher in the spirit. And by the way, because we asked for this, so we're not judging anyone.
Oh, yeah.
To bring in. But by the way, I just thought, boy, it would have been even better if he said, "What if Bogdanovich comes out like a hellfire? Are they going to have to pivot off of it?" That would have been the ultimate version of this. And by the way, go ahead. Yeah.
His thing, Cypher is rational, so it's not that. It's that I do find a segment of the fan base here that is bordering on irrational when it comes to this, though. And so I do think like for them it wouldn't be a spicy take. It would be like, oh, I think this is going to happen, and I think that's like I really want to warn people like there's just really no threat of that. There's really no threat of them being good as far as I'm concerned.
We're going to get into some more takes here coming up in a second, but also want to make sure we go ahead and give this the scale. On a scale of 1 to dribble, I'm giving it 2.5 dribbles for the premise. Really liked it from Cypher. And then just in terms of the presentation, that was stronger than maybe the question you're asking. 3 Vince Carters on presentation. Lovely execution. Coming back on the other side, man, let's talk about what we think is possible when we look at a Cam Thomas comp coming from the fan base. We'll be right back with that coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle. You're going to level it up to peak performance. You got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Maybe you're in the speed. Maybe it's power. Maybe it's style. eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time. Or your money back with eBay Motors. You're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, as we continue on today's Locked On Nets episode, it's Fan Friday. It's our version of a mailbag, and frankly, we want these takes coming in all off season and into the regular season long, so we have opportunities maybe to go as wild as you want. Trade opportunities as we get into the season and towards the deadline, get those dialed up as well. We'll log them in and hopefully break them out here along the way. Next one up here, Doug, is going to be...
Well, pause real
quick
quick before you get into this next one. What is the grading system that you gave there at the end? I mean, what was that?
I gave him 2.5
It had dribbles. It had Vince Carter's. It had a
Yeah.
scale, but it seemed like the dribbles were the low. It was a low number of dribbles, but possibly like that was a good score. Like I have like no idea about the scoring system.
No, I mean, on a dribble scale, not the best. Then maybe we'll find out along the way here. But again, presentation wise, everybody knows 3 Vince Carters and you're pretty much killing it. So, good job on presentation, and you got to work a little bit in terms of what you're bringing to the table, like something a little bit spicier than Ben Simmons. So 2.5 dribbles. Doug, stay on task here. We really understand the scale. It couldn't be any more clear, and it'll only become crystallized as we work our way through.
Gotcha.
Now, also on the table here is a Cam Thomas comparison coming in from Brooklyn Nets Buzz, who, by the way, gave us this takeover on X, and then at the end of it said, I will be tuning in on Friday. So get in the comments. We expect to see you here. Hand up. Hot take. Cam Thomas has just as much potential as Devin Booker. P.S. Compare Cam Thomas last season to Booker's second season in the NBA, and they are very similar stats. What do you guys think?
Okay, so this I'll stop short on this one. Although I will say that
I didn't mind this one.
It's funny. What's that? Well, it's funny because our friends over at FanDuel released the odds for scoring to win the scoring title this year. And Cam Thomas was 14th overall, which is like crazy, especially when you hear the names that are the rest of this list, which I'll roll through super fast. Luka, Embiid, SGA, Giannis, Trey, Brunson, Edwards, Mitchell, Donovan Mitchell, Tatum, Jokic, KD, Ja, Devin Booker, and then Cam Thomas, and then Steph Curry, and then Wemby, then LeBron, then AD. I'll just go through the whole list. I mean, that's all the best players in the league. Those are the best players in the league, and then Cam Thomas. So from that standpoint, from just like an overall opportunity standpoint and ability to score, in the old put your money where your mouth is, because they actually have a live line on it, and it's like these aren't super liquid markets, but good enough. Cam Thomas. That's like there'd be a section of fan that would tune into those odds and be like, whoa, where'd this come from? Right now, bad team, a lot of shots. I get it. There's context here, but you also have to be able to score. And so Cam Thomas has that ability. In terms of like what his overall, like if he could get to the Devin Booker level, we've made that comparison before. I will say he has a long way to go, obviously, on like a full team level. And even if you just watch Booker in the Olympics this year, I mean, he was one of the best players on the team. The guy was completely selfless. Like he took a sort of secondary role on that team. He picked up a lot of good defensive matchups. Like he played like a role player. And that's like, to me, like the ultimate hallmark of a really good team. Not to say a really good player, a great player, not to say Cam Thomas can't do it. But I will say with Booker, for me, there was a moment in the Olympics this year, which I thought was, no one's gonna remember this, but I thought it was like a defining moment for Booker. It was on that crazy Steph shot in the championship game where Steph hits the iconic three, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe it was the second out, and Booker does not celebrate and instantly picks up his guy full court, right? And I was like, wow. I was like, and he picks up a guy full court because he's like, that's the assignment. The assignment here is to not just celebrate here. My assignment on this team is to be like an all-out defender and hit shots when I get it. So I don't know. That's more of like Devin Booker love than a Cam Thomas knock. I'm not saying Cam Thomas can't be that guy. I just think he has a ways to go still in terms of like fully complete player. But look, I preface this by saying he's among the leaders in potentially scoring this year, and you don't just land on that list because you get a lot of shots.
No, listen, I mean, it makes it exciting watch. Obviously, Cam Thomas this season, something that maybe Brooklyn Nets fans will be able to hang their hat on, is watching how much and how high Cam Thomas can rise in terms of the points per game and where he'll be in those rankings. I think you say it right, though. Like Booker, it's funny because you look out in Phoenix and, hey, what team wouldn't try to pivot and get Kevin Durant, which is what they decided to do, and it really helped out the Brooklyn Nets in the long run. But it puts Booker in the position of not being the number one, right? You are not going to be the leader of a championship level franchise. Maybe you can go back when they had Chris Paul as well. Like there's versions of that team that he's a part of, but he is not the number one. Same thing when you go to the Olympics, which isn't a knock either. It's like, hey, you need to be able to do what he does on the defensive end to be able to serve the rest of this team in the best way possible. So I think, listen, I won't even say comparison. I'll just say if you want to put a trajectory of where Devin Booker's career has gone, I think you would love to see Cam Thomas continue to develop his offensive game, become one of the top scorers in the league, and then also be in a position where he's viewed as someone that can be a supporting cast member in these critical moments, whether it's rebuilding Brooklyn Nets franchise and they want to have elite talents coming in next year's draft class, or I don't know if he'll ever get to the point when his all-around game will be valued at the Olympic level for a Team USA. But hey, if he starts getting into those conversations too, that would be a heck of an accomplishment for a player that early in his career, through no fault of his own potentially, was looked at as maybe being microwave scorer off the bench that may never get a full-time role. All of a sudden, we walk into a year where he's a top 15 potential scorer in the league from an odd standpoint.
If he has, look, if Cam Thomas, if Cam Thomas has a season this year where the efficiency stays high, he has to be
And they
efficient.
have comparatively between these two guys, like their efficiency
Right.
numbers have stayed the same early in their careers.
He needs to stay. He has to be an efficient scorer. And if there's a game expansion where you see that he can be like more on ball in terms of like offensive facilitation, not just, getting his own shot, which we saw hints of last year, then yeah, let's continue to have that conversation. Devin Booker is top 15 player in the whole league, right? Like, so it's just lofty praise. It's not a knock on Cam Thomas. These are just like the best players in the league. And again, he's on the list with scoring. Now you want to say, well, Jordan Poole was up there last year when they thought he was going to be tank commanding his way into 25 shots a game. He didn't get there. I can hear that too. I think Cam Thomas is, has a better chance of scoring high on that list just because of the efficiency numbers. But overall, it's just like, I think sometimes when you're like, oh, I don't know if you can get to Devin Booker levels. And then people are like, what are you hating on Cam Thomas? I'm like, no. Right? Like, it's just like we're comparing him to one of the best players in all of basketball. Do you think Cam Thomas is going to be there? It takes a lot to get there. There's a lot of guys that aren't there. Most guys aren't. So just by a numbers standpoint, most guys aren't at that level, right? And so
there's only like 10 guys that are in that air territory. So can he be in one of those groups? Yeah. No, I know. And I know that Doug, by the way, as you listen, if you follow the podcast, like Doug has a hard time with authenticity. So talking about something like this, he's giving honest caveats to it. But Doug, just go ahead, step back, say, listen, Cam Thomas, top 3 player in the league this season. That's all.
Last point about him is, I'll say this.
Yeah.
Is that how far he's come is unbelievable. The guy, remember, he did not start the first game of the year last year. He was not in the starting lineup. He didn't start 25% of the Nets games last year. 25%. Right. He didn't start 51 out of 67. It's like 70. It was like 23%. 51 out of 66. He started. He didn't start 15 games last year. Like, now it's just an unbelievable story. And the Nets and maybe kind of buried him, but it's just, it's very few players go from that to the next thing in the next year. That's all.
Very nice stuff from Brooklyn Nets Buzz. I know you're watching over on YouTube right now. That's 3 alley-oops on the presentation. And I give you a Joe Johnson gentleman triple in terms of execution. Thanks for being a part of it, guys. Keep the questions coming. We close out, though, getting a little bit weirder and more wild when it comes to potential takes around who could perform at a high level in the upcoming season. 2 takes from the fans to close out today's show. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, let you know the show's sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, it's headed back to school time. What's something you love to learn as an adult? Are you making time to learn new things as often as you like? Was that lost when you were just in childhood? Hey, look, that can be the case as we get older. We know kids are always learning. They're always growing. As adults, sometimes we just lose that curiosity. Maybe there's something you like to learn. Maybe it's gardening, a new language. Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's just, how to dribble a basketball. Like what Adam said before, maybe beat your best friends in bowling. Therapy can help you connect and reconnect with your sense of wonder. And because back to school era can come at any age. Look, if you've benefited from therapy in the past, you're going to know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you want to get in with BetterHelp today. They're going to match you with a licensed therapist. They're going to make sure it's right for you. It's time to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's 100% suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire. You're going to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. It's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, as we prepare to wrap up the Locked On Nets episode, first of many Fan Fridays that we're going to do throughout the course of this season, we're going to do a quick double dip here because there's a couple of good ones, but I don't know how many legs they have, and I also want to make sure that we cover these. J Harp comes in. Now, this does touch into Ben Simmons a little bit, but I actually thought that this was an interesting premise. Healthy Simmons, when we get there. Healthy Simmons, professional Schroeder, DFS, and Cam Johnson, improved Cam Thomas, Noah Clowney, Nicholas Claxton, Jalen Wilson. Coach messes up the tank, and the Nets enter the lottery in the 4th slot behind Washington, Detroit, and Portland. Now, this I thought was at least interesting because it's based in the reality of, hey, we want to be tanking. We want to get the best pick possible. The world where the Nets do just enough to end up putting themselves outside of those lottery odds, those top 3 being where it's like that 14+% to spike the number 1 when we talk about lottery.
I think people forget too, because they have not followed a tanking team in recent years because the Nets have been trying. Take it from someone who's done minutes evaluations for every team in the NBA every single night for the last decade, basically. If you want to tank, it is not hard. And it does not matter all the time if you have even if you have good players. Right. Portland tanked for years with Dame, and Dame is light years better than anyone that the Nets have, right? Like, and so, and I know he was hurt a few of those years, but they just you can just have talent on your team and find ways to do this. Like, it's just not hard. You have injuries that just have guys not play games. I'm putting injuries in quotes. You have just shuttle the guys in and out. You trade guys. You bring guys, shuttle them in and out of the G League. You have you just have guys like take nights off. You have minutes caps on some of your best players. Like, it's not hard. This is not hard. Even if you have good players, teams find a way. OKC had a tank year in there, right? We saw what Memphis went through last year after they lost Ja, and they still had Jaren Jackson Jr. for a lot of those games. They sucked, right? Like, Portland's done this for years with guys like real NBA guys on the team. Not near the end, but they've done it. People just don't realize how easy this is to do in the current NBA. And it doesn't have to involve you just like sitting everybody. There's just ways to finagle this that you can just lose games. Now, sometimes people get caught in like looking at like the Detroits of the world, Washington. Sometimes you're just bad enough and it doesn't really matter. But there's been good teams. Look what Dallas did at the end of the year last year. They had Luka 2 years ago, and they tanked. Now, it's not the same exact thing, but they tanked their way into the lottery to get lively with like 5 games left in the season. Now, that was going from playoffs to lottery, right? And so it's a little different, but they just took their foot all the way off the gas, lost games on purpose. My point is, there are many ways to go about this, and it's much easier to do if you have a plan to do it. And so this is the other reason I'm just not worried about this at all. Is that even if by some miracle everything came together and they looked awesome, the Nets would still be incentivized to fudge the numbers here and get all themselves down to the bottom. So it's just like that's what we have to look at, is the motivation. And once you know the motivation is there and you know that there are ways to wrangle it within the confines of like acceptable NBA practices. And I hate that this is the system, by the way. I wish it was like the Premier League where you get relegated and we just had lots of teams going in and out. That would be the ideal system. So everyone's always trying. I get it. This system sucks. But once you understand how the system works, it's just not hard to do this. So anyway, that's my short, long answer for like why the main reason I'm just not worried about this.
No, I think it's not as big of a concern even on that level. And there was actually, we're going to do like a tank tracker throughout the course of this year, comparing where the Nets like are going to be potentially versus other teams that have had really bad seasons. It was a few years ago that the Orlando Magic had, I think they ended up with 20 wins or something like that. They had 5 instances throughout the year when they won back-to-back games and still only ended up being a 20-win team. So it's I think just to your point, there's times when you're going to win a couple of games. There's also a million ways that you can manipulate.
The Jazz, multiple years, the Jazz started off, they were like, oh, they're going to make the playoffs. They were easily in the lottery. They had market. Like, this is just not hard to do. Once you set your goal, once you set your sights on sucking, like, you can do it. It's not that difficult to do, even if you have really good players. And great news, the Nets don't have that many of them. So they're in pretty good shape.
J Harp, that's going to be 2 lumbering Brook Lopez's on presentation. And in terms of execution, I'm giving you a Trendon Watford full court sprint. Last but not least, that's
weird. That's exactly the score I was going to give them.
See, now you're getting on the same page. Now we're finding the rhythm a little bit.
It's like literally word for word, the exact score. That's crazy.
Now, how about if I told you that I just wanted to do this This is the dream within a dream. Maybe it's Keon Johnson rocking a top 10 POA defender. Killian Hayes first in assist leader. Ben Simmons leads the Nets to 5 straight wins, and Jalen Wilson leads the league in 3-point field goal percentage. That is from Flaglin Ace over on X. And this really, I didn't want all the questions or responses to be like this, but I wanted at least one like this.
If this happens, I'll donate. If these 3 things happen, I'll donate $5,000 to the charity of choice for this for whoever this person was. So if Jalen Wilson, what was it again?
We've got Jalen Wilson. He's going to be going down for the 3-point field goal percentage, lead the league. Ben Simmons, 5 straight wins. I mean, that actually could happen somewhere inside of a healthy season for him. Killian Hayes, first in assists. How about that? But maybe this one's actually interesting. Keon Johnson, top 10 POA defender. Listen, I'll put him as being top 10 POA defender on the Brooklyn Nets potentially. That's obviously it's
okay. So that one's a little harder to track. The other ones aren't. I'll give $5,000 to the charity of choice for whoever this was. So you can mark that one down. It's going to need all 3 of these things to happen. I thought about saying 1 million because that's how close or like maybe 100,000 because I'm like, what could I read? What could I do? But 5,000 feels like just in case. But like
feels like the right number.
Yeah, we'll do $5,000 to charity of choice if this happens. And I was thinking about scaling it down for even if one of them happens, I'll give 500 if just even one of those happens.
And by the way, I'll just dump in there too because he double dipped over on the comment section here. Let's put this into the category: 5,000 to charity. Zaire Williams, lethal mid-range scorer. I don't know what the metrics would be to measure that. I'm sure those go by percentage. Top 10 in the league, let's say. So Zaire Williams also being an absolute assassin in the mid-range game, potential there as well. Listen, I love it. I think what's funny about this is that you end up getting this spectrum. I think it's some fears about falling out of the lottery. I think there's some of the optimism that the fan base is still willing to bring about, well, what if player X ends up looking good and forces a pivot from the organization in terms of the tank? And then you have the outlandish things. But even when it comes to it, Cam Thomas remains my favorite here because no matter what happens this season, all the losses, there is this expectation about what's the next leap for him with the way he finished out last year. That actually is something exciting to track over the course of this one, regardless of wins and losses.
Look, I'm excited for this season because I think there's lots of different ways that it can go in terms of learning a lot about different players. It's not like there's no doom and gloom for me on this side of things. I think that this is going to be a really, really interesting year for just figuring out, sort of other assets they can get from trades. Some of these guys they took flyers on. 1 or 2 of these guys is going to pop for sure because they're just going to have the chance to do it, right? And so, the cool thing, go back and we'll get out of here, I think, in a second maybe, but going back to those tanking teams, one fun thing that happens with those tanking teams every year is you just find dudes that can actually play, right? Yeah. And Vince Williams, okay, that guy can play for Memphis. Tumani Kamara, he can play for the Blazers. These guys that got chances to play that they might not have had chances to play before. Now, all of a sudden, that they can do it. That's going to happen for the Nets here. I'm not exactly sure who it's going to be, but someone will pop for sure because they're just going to get more chance. And there's guys that are around the NBA. So I'm excited to go into the season because I think it's going to be a new narrative that we're going through. It's just I always have to stop short on these, just on these things happen. I just think they're funny, but that's mostly it.
Now, Flaglin Ace, I want you to know as well, we're going to give you a Jason Kidd dime in terms of execution. And I thought from a presentation standpoint, I'm going with 1 pair of Keith Van Horn high socks. So that's basically the scale, guys. You can clearly understand where the hierarchy leads. So try to get your questions and comments in order because going forward, you have a chance to make the board and maybe be into that 2, potentially 3 dribble category.
I mean, could you imagine with this, with a scoring system like this, who wouldn't want to put this in the old bulletin board?
That's right.
This is just kudos to Adam for the highlight of this episode, which was coming out with these scoring systems. That is how he's not the best in the business for nothing, folks. All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciate everyone who's rocking with us through the offseason. Thanks so much for everyone that put into these spicy takes too, because these are super fun to run through. Probably going to be some more along the way. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
It's Mega Maid, and she's gone from suck to blow. Why, that is Lord Helmet.
One of the all-time great poets. I love it. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.